All right, let's do it.
All right.
Welcome to another episode of Birdsong. I'm your host, Kayuda, and in this episode, well, I've got someone that received a potent message from the plant medicine, Ayahuasca, during what turned out to be a much-needed exorcism of a dark entity emanating from his solar plexus region. And during this exorcism, the message came through that Mother Earth needed help and a deal had to be made, a promise that if he wanted to live, then he had to live for others. It was said that the entertainment industry, which it had inhabited for over a decade, was the 10th circle of hell, full of demons and darkness, and that the more time that was spent there, the more corruption it breeds. And so, Nick, you were told that you're a bridge, it's your role in this life. Go back to your homelands, find your roots, do charity work there, live for others, and the message essentially was, help or die. And so a journey was had, volunteer work unfolded, ceremonies were held, plant medicine was consumed, a book was written, and here we are. It's the charitable comedian, not afraid to spin the profane with the sacred, the ayahuasca drinking, a bogus slinging, psychedelic thinking, author of the book No More Trippin, Nick Sun. Welcome, mate.
Hey, thanks. That was an awesome intro. Probably my favorite intro I've ever had.
Oh, great. That's good. Yeah. You just told me where you're at. Give everyone else a reference point for where you're at in time and space right now.
Well, I'm living in Sydney. I spent 5 years in Darwin, which was an amazing experience. And then I was called to re-enter the 10th circle of hell of the entertainment industry, which is
back.
A very interesting adventure. And so I moved back to Sydney, where it's there's a lot more comedy. Clearly, there's not much comedy in Darwin because people are reasonably happy and connected, I'd say. So I had to come back into the belly of the beast to entertain the masses.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got your book right here, and you know what?
Awesome.
While I want to touch on, I'd love to hear your reflections on the use of language, really, while I was reading your book. And I couldn't put it down once I first started, honestly. I was stifling chuckles in bed with my family asleep next to me at times. And
That's good.
It is good, yeah. I quickly came to realize that in amongst all of the jokes and the profane and the occasional kind of all caps informal way of text appearing in a novel, you actually use a pretty rich array of language. It's like an interesting amalgamation of how language is being used. I found it to be quite evocative, really. And I was curious if you've had this knack or this connection in using language in a way that can be evocative, or by using uncommon words, almost like you had your brain plugged into a thesaurus or a synonym machine. Is this something that came through at the evolving plant medicine path? Was it born during pre-plant medicine comedy times? Was it there before that? And you're grappling with languages kind of spurred you onto the comedic path? Tell us a bit about that relationship.
This is a good idea. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've always been a writer. Even when I was in primary school, I'd write the stories. I'd write these horrible stories. I got teased a lot in primary school. And I'd write these horrible stories about the death of my classmates who were bullying me.
It's quite
Except they'd always get laughs. Yeah, I'd go to graphic depictions of their demise. In these times now, I would have been fucking investigated. But
how did the teachers respond to that?
They're like, "Oh, Nick, you're so quirky and weird." And everyone else was like, "Oh, these are funny stories," and I was like, "Oh no, I'm really don't like you." So really, what I feel happened is my family are not good at communicating. We're emotionally, and it could be a cultural thing. It's just communication is not good. So for some weird reason, I developed this the writing and the comedy as a way to process emotions and to actually probably express emotions that I didn't really feel comfortable with sharing. So I think it came out of that, and then the mix of language is I've always been a very wide reader. And obviously, I was a stand-up comedian for 13 years, which, means that you hang out with a lot of comedians. And so your sense of humor becomes pretty offensive because it's just, I don't know, it's the culture, you sort of get very desensitized. So I always love the profanity. as a balancer, like my favorite comedy was always the stuff which combined the high and the low, the sacred with the profane,
Mm,
and because I always found that the profanity balanced out the sacredness or the
mm,
seriousness, and also profanity for me, it's profane because it's usually relating to our animal nature,
mm,
all the rude words, fuck, shit, I don't have to name them, you all know them.
mhm.
um, it's all to do with our animal nature, which I always found very interesting because it was signaling to me that there's this huge repression of our animal side. So all the very more in-depth intellectual stuff that I always loved, like comparative mythology and all the other stuff I was reading with very obscure vocabulary, um, I almost found that was like the other side of humanity, the highfalutin intellectuality of it all. And
Yeah, sure.
then you go into the stand-up comedy world and everything's, there's a lot of toilet humor. And I don't know. There's a part of me that's still 5 and thinks that stuff's funny. And then there's another part of me who's like, pretty pretentious and, reading Joseph Campbell and like, yes. And then go into comedy world and it's just poo bomb piss wee stuff. So, um, yeah, I like that mix. I don't know. That's just my flavor, And I've tried to
Yeah.
grow. I thought after like 6 years of doing all this healing work, my comedy act would be like some kind of TED talk, uplifting, and it's just the same. It's the same profanity, offensive stuff. I'm less self-sabotaging and I stand behind myself more.
Mm.
So yeah, it's been pretty interesting. Yeah, process for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think it's great. And I've heard you speak about this common thread throughout a lot of comedians, which is that there can be and there often is a lot of pain or a lot of trauma, which is where a lot of the material's drawn from. Do you reckon it's a common thread for comedians to be voracious readers and writers, or is that just something that within yourself?
It depends on the comedian. There are some comedians who are very like some of the smartest and sort of, I almost call them street philosophers, the way that they interpret the world.
Mm,
I'd say like comedians, like those kinds of comedians who are kind of my favorite guys, we're kind of like too dumb to be like, like a proper novelist and too smart to have like, or maybe too dysfunctional to have a proper job. So
mm,
it's kind of like stuck between these two worlds. But yeah, some comedians definitely. There's different levels. There's some
mm,
guys who are just like, you know, they want to make people laugh, and that's great. And then there's people who have sort of like higher pretensions, like myself, who are trying to bring. I guess without sounding too pretentious, I'm trying to like bring awareness into hidden stuff which people don't realize is like trying to shed awareness basically in a funny way.
mm.
So um and that can be a bit more difficult really, but that's kind of what I go for. And yeah, so there are definitely comedians who are very smart and they do a lot of reading, but um uh in terms of I haven't met any other comedian who's sort of delved into the sort of side of all the medicine and the shamanic
Mm.
healing sort of that sort of world as much. No, I haven't really. Maybe Duncan Trussell that sort of heads a little bit in that direction.
Right. Hmm.
But yeah, but it's yeah. I think yeah, that's the end of that one.
When you're talking about when you're talking about awareness and also that message that came through from ayahuasca or about being a bridge between worlds, do you ever think about how to bridge worlds, like between the people who understand or have a context or a frame of reference for where your comedy has evolved to and kind of where it's come from in terms of the plant medicine, the esoteric, the occult, the paranormal, these sorts of things, and then the people that don't have that reference point? Like, do you think about how you're using
Oh,
language to potentially build a bridge,
oh
or?
man, that's exactly where I'm at now because I was like, because when you're in the plant medicine bubble, you're like, all right, the ascension's happening, everyone's waking up, and then I'm like, all right, I'm going to go back into comedy, I'm going to try and bridge those two worlds,
Mm,
and what I've been surprised about is like the mean average of people, it's like is still heavily disassociated, very much asleep.
mm.
Or maybe I suck. I'm not really sure, but well, what I see, well, and it is hard to judge, but I see that the majority of the comedy audiences are sort of coming to escape. Basically, I feel like there's this like twin process of like these times are either speeding you up and like accelerating your growth and
Mm,
your sort of spiritual path, or they're making people just shut down even more. So But having said that, I'm surprised that most people know what ayahuasca is when I try and talk about it in the act. But there's a lot of exposition that I have to go into. So I started just dropping that material and just trying to connect with them on that level.
Mm.
And then just realizing that, then I started playing like book launches at like, the psychedelic societies, and everything that wasn't working in the average Saturday night crowd was like suddenly they knew what I was talking about. So
Right.
I think the next step is to actually find an audience and build that whole side of things. And I'm seeing that happen anyway in not just in the comedy world, but in the world in general. Like it's the mainstream's sort of dead. It's just sort of splitting into 1,000 different niches. So I'm sort of at this point where I'm like, okay, I've spent 6 months back in like the normal Matrix world doing comedy, which, I've kind of enjoyed on some level. Like it's grounded me. Like it's helped me learn how to talk to people who haven't spent 6 years taking psychedelics in the woods. And, just living a weird life. And and then another part of me is just like, when you're driving for 2 hours to then sort of die in front of a bunch of bogans on Saturday night, I'm like, I'm not sure if I really want this, so I'm not sure if they're ever going to get me, so
Yeah, is there a place for you to inhabit at the plant medicine and psychedelic integration conferences and these sorts of things? Because all that world seems like kind of very, very serious,
Yeah, this is kind of what my friends were telling me. They're like, well, Nick, the book is kind of a bit too, maybe it's not, I don't know, but they were kind of saying it's a bit too out there for like, say, the scientific psychedelic community. And it's a bit too kind of like maybe offensive or irreverent for like the more sacred, medicine people. But then, I think maybe it's just sort of the new culture which is coming out, where there are just a lot of, because I came from a background of just like addiction, really. I was sort of in the drug scene and I was looking for something. I just didn't know what it was. So I just kind of stumbled into this from not the usual routes. So I think maybe it's just for the grassroots underground people, but I have been giving it to like just regular people as well, like comedians and stuff like that. And they're like, man, this is great. This is awesome. And I'm like, so you don't think that the whole plant medicine stuff's too weird? And they're like, no, I just kind of read that as like a sort of, sort of like a fantasy sort of thing. So I'm like, okay, so I don't know. I think it's going to be a slow burn maybe. And I'm just going to I've just thrown it into the world. And I mean, that ends like 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm currently sort of assembling, bits and pieces for the second book that's sort of coming through that it's kind of more of a novel, and I'm trying to make it more just like a good story. Because like the first book, I didn't really realize I was writing a book. I was just sort of coming down off ayahuasca and blogging and trying to just integrate my experience. And then I had to just sort of squeeze into a book. So I didn't actually know what I was doing. So and I would never write a book like that again. Because it was a nightmare. It was like 800 pages long, man.
Mate, it's a great book. Like that first chapter, and then going into the second chapter, man, that tripped me out. It took me a moment to realize what is going on here. Where is he going with this?
Yeah, awesome, man. I wrote it like a joke. So so it's hard to say where, but I guess it's coming from like a position of a guy who was trying to just get some healing done, who wasn't well, and it's just trying to write a real, of what happened to me, and sometimes, we have this idea of what the healing process is going to be like and what the training process is like, going to Peru and spending 10 years with this maestro curandero. But I think the reality is, like, I've talked to a lot of people on the sort of grassroots underground scene, and it's sort of similar to my process where you don't really know what you're doing. You probably end up like taking too much, not the best ways, and so I'm reading back through it one more time just to get rid of the typos. And I was like, this is almost like a compendium of like how not to do psychedelics in some ways.
Great.
so yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I see the role that you're playing, or just the way that you're showing up, just as you, as a comedian, and not being afraid to poke fun at the sacred and the holy. I see that as a super important role, because we do see that in a lot of the plant medicine and the sacred medicine space, that, you know, it's all considered sacred and holy and divine, and something that should be taken very, very seriously. And yeah, to be sure that there's a lot there to be taken seriously. But
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
you know, I'm then also curious, like as a comedian, how do you find yourself approaching the sacred and the holy? And is there anything that's off limits to you as a comedian? Is there anything you're not entirely comfortable poking a stick at, whether it's in regards to sensitive taboo topics or the sacred and holy, or, you know, maybe there's even some kind of link between the two, depending on how you want to frame it all?
Yeah. I mean, there's like a long history of like, you know, the archetype of the sacred clown. And, you know, I went to a Sundance in America and met these Heyokas, Lakota clown
Ooh,
shamans.
say more
And
about that.
well, the Heyokas are basically these tricksters, and the trickster archetype is like rife through almost every culture. You know, the Tibetans have the crazy wisdom guy who upsets taboos, and it's his job to basically call out the higher monks and make fun of them, and they break all the rules, like they sleep with women, they get drunk, they do everything a monk's not meant to do, but they're still a highly enlightened being. And then these Lakota clown shamans, I met this amazing dude called Rocky Crow Dog, who was the funniest dude I've ever met. Like you'd go into a sweat lodge with him, and instead of singing songs, he just rant about being abducted by UFOs for 40 minutes while you're in a sweat lodge. I was just like, wow. And then for the Sundance, everyone was wearing, you know, the traditional Sundance garb. And then for some reason, he just decided he wanted to dress like one of the guys from Kiss. So he was dressed in like his death metal Warpath Massacre death metal shirt, and then had his face made up like the guy who dresses like a cat from Kiss.
Wow.
And so they have these trickster figures all through the scene as this element of like chaos and like overturning order. As a way, from what
yeah.
you go.
Oh, I was going to ask how that was received by the larger community that were doing Sundance. Was, you know, did you feel that everyone was still deeply connected to that Heyoka or the tradition of the sacred clown coming in and disturbing and causing chaos in the space? Or
oh yeah, I mean he was an accepted part of the ceremony. So everyone's like, oh yeah, it's Rocky. He's playing that role. I mean, he did piss off some people when he was like ranting about his UFO abduction experiences in the sweat lodge. Like, I remember one guy was like, "Hey man, aren't you going to sing some songs?" And he was like, "No, I don't really do that," and he just left. so he was a bit of a so you've got these figures all the way through world shamanic cultures where it's their kind of job. And I was talking to him. I was like, "So what do you like? How does it work for you?" And he goes, "Well, when I do a vision quest, I get taken to the clown realms." And I was like, "What's the clown realms?" And he goes, "Well, I just get taken to the Hyoka realms, and there's all these like trickster spirits, and all they do is play tricks on me. Like they just play all these tricks on me." And one day I just asked him, I was like, why are you playing these tricks on me? And because all the tricks he said was like tripping him up when he's like trying to do a vision quest, he'd fall down, and then they'd just sort of make fun of him all the time. And he said that they turned to him and said, because we just like the look on your face. So I don't know. It's just, yeah, so there's definitely a part to play in that. In terms of like lines, I really think it has to do with like intent. So, and also intent, it can't be like conscious. Like I'm very much now coming back into comedy when I'd say before I was quite damaged. I had a lot of anger and hatred, a lot of dark emotions. And so I felt like I was kind of like, yeah, I almost feel like I was being sort of piloted by my depression and that entity sort of thing. It was kind of like messing up my creative faculty and sort of using it for a bit more less, kind of malefic means in a way. Like it wasn't. I was watching some old videos, just going, "Oh, geez, that was a bit much." Like, what am I even trying to prove there? And so I really think it's important to see where the shock and the fence is coming from. But I believe there's some taboos that need to be knocked over, and like there's just a lot of bullshit in the world right now. So it's like, but it has to come from a place of no ego. So I'm now like just trying to get out of the way, if that makes sense. Like the less I'm in the picture, because you always have this idea of what you want to be funny and what the material that you want to work. And sometimes there's a sort of a meeting of that. But a lot of the times I'm realizing that what I think is going to be funny just sucks. And then what ends up working as material is something I didn't really put much thought into, or I just riff on stage in the moment. and yeah, it's not what I actually. It came off the side of the actual idea that I was trying to try out. So I would say, yeah, it's very. But my general line is like, I don't want to do anything which is like, um, I don't know. If you're trying to serious, if you have an agenda, then it makes comedy serious, and it's just not funny. So it's like, it's this weird Zen state that you have to get into, if you know what I mean. Like, so I'm kind of just going on stage now with a few ideas in my head that I haven't written out much, and yeah, I'm trying to get into a flow state beforehand. So I'll go do a lot of exercise, or go swimming, or I'll do some qigong. Sometimes I'll take microdose, and then I'll just go on stage and just see what happens. And that's been very exciting to do, and then see what comes out, But in terms of like, yeah, I don't think there's any line. You just have to, I think, just depending on the taboo, depending on what you're trying to address, your skill set has to be higher. Like if you're going to try and make jokes about what's happening in Gaza right now, which I've seen a bunch of comedians attempt and not really pull off very well.
Right.
You have to have a really good point of view, and it has to be really sharp, So, so I feel like there's no line. It just has to be, you have to make sure it's really good.
Yeah, I hear.
Yeah.
When you're on stage, how long are you up there for? Like how long?
At the moment, I've been out of the game for 6 years. So at the moment, I'm just doing lots of 10-minute spots, and I'm just throwing as much different shit at the wall as possible, seeing what sticks. And because I've changed heaps since I've stopped. So I'm trying to work out who I am on stage again. And yeah, so it's mostly 10 minutes to 20 to 30 minutes. And in September, I've kind of got this trial show in Sydney, which will be like maybe 50 minutes. And I'm just going to, it's kind of like a work in progress. And I'm just getting used to, being in stage, it's like a different like state of being, it's like you kind of have to be in flow state. It's almost like a martial arts in a way, or like basically you can't be boring, which is like, it's a really weird, like coming back to it after all the work I've done. I'm like, this is really weird. Like you have to be on stage. People can't be distracted. They can't be like, and so it's like, okay, how do I be interesting enough to hold people's attention for like 50 minutes, especially right now where people's attention spans are actually declining. And I've noticed that heaps in the younger audiences, like they just tune out. And I've worked out like having really sharp jokes isn't actually enough. You need to create a journey, or create a experience or an incident. So in some ways it's kind of good if you are a bit offensive, because it does get a reaction, which then creates a certain situation in the audience, and then becomes more like a experience. And it doesn't even have to be offensive. It can just be something weird, or just, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I would have been under the presumption that people going to a comedy show are there to pay attention and to listen. But you're saying that that's not necessarily the case. People can disengage and not really care about who's up there or what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the crowd. Some crowds are like really just, if you go to a country town, sometimes they're the nicest crowds ever, because they're just like, oh my God, somebody's come to entertain us, They've come all the way to our outback town, so they're amazing audiences. And, I've had very amazing experiences where I'm like, whoa, I did not expect to connect with these guys. It just revealed to me how prejudiced I was, because I'd just be like staring at them off stage, just going, oh, this is going to be terrible. Like, and then the city crowds can be quite entitled, like I did a show on Thursday where I was emceeing, and everyone was loving it. And there was this one woman, and she just had this look of just, I was watching her through every act like a psychopath, and it was just
complete and utter disgust and disdain, was it?
Just folded arms, just like, impress me. And then I brought it up. I was like, hey, look, I've been watching you all night. Like, what's going on? Like,
oh, you put her on the spot.
Yeah, I'm like a guy who picks scabs. I can't help it. More professional comedian would just like put the game face on and do their routine, but like, I'm
And
one
how
of
did
my
she respond
flaws.
to that? How did she respond?
It got tense. She said, "What is this, an intervention? I thought you were the comedian." And then I wanted to say something back, a bit snarky, but like I was MC, you kind of got to hold things together.
Sure.
So I demonstrated a sense of self control that I don't think I would have had 6 years ago,
Mm.
and I brought on the
Evolution.
next act.
Evolution, baby.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
circling back before we close up that thread, have you got, or rather, I'm curious to hear any other insights you might have between that, the realizations you've had, or your relationship between that role of stand-up comedian and everything that comes with that in the modern socio-cultural context, and then also
Yeah.
more of this kind of archaic or archetypal roles of the sacred clown, and then how they show up in the
Oh,
socio-cultural context of times that have passed, and also not just times that have passed, but are obviously still here in the here and now too.
yeah. I mean, like, I would say, like, it's weird because, like, comedy is a huge industry now. It's never been bigger.
Mm,
So I've never seen more people trying to do it before.
mm,
And I've never seen, and it's a really good level. Like, I've been sort of checking everything out because I've been out of it for 6 years. But it's kind of become this form, like, become serious, and there's like stuff at stake. People can make a lot of money and
mm,
become famous and all that. So the actual archetype of the trickster or the clown, um, and also I found that no one's actually really talking about what's sort of happening, which I thought, somebody might be like, "Hey, do you guys see what's going on right now? It's pretty fucked up." It's pretty,
mm,
things have never been weirder, in my opinion, like in the whole of human history
mm,
that I know of. Like,
mm,
so no one's really talking about it. And if anything, what I've noticed is you've got all these people like, Joe Rogan and Russell Brand, where they've almost become like the news anchors. Like, they've become this independent media source that people go to look for information from.
mm.
Uh, so I don't know if that's a testament to the times we're in, where we're in this upside down times now, where the clowns are now the news people,
Hmm.
and the news people are just, I don't know what they are. I've watched news a few times recently, and
You're talking about the
I don't feel
conventional kind of TV news? Is that what
conventional.
you're talking?
I don't even
Yeah,
know who watches that except for like 60, 70-year-old people in the
yeah.
suburbs.
Hmm.
So so yeah, I haven't really seen many. I mean, there's a few comedians who sort of tackling like the taboos, but it's like I said, the spreadsheet is so wide now. But in terms of the
Mm,
actual archetypal clown trickster figure, um, I'm not sure if you'd actually find him in the stand-up scene, because
mm,
it's become like a sort of a serious arena. It's become this form.
mm,
Like, so I wonder. I'm trying to think. There's a resurgence of actual clown, which has been very interesting.
mm.
Like old school, what they call it, new clown. And some of those guys are really funny. Like, I was laughing longer at that stuff than actual straight stand up.
Oh, well, what's the
So,
difference then between the two?
clown is like sometimes non-verbal. Like, there's this guy
Like
who's
performance, like theater?
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. There's a guy. One of my friends. He's hilarious. His name's Dr. Brown, and he'll do
Mm.
something like just eat breakfast on stage for 10 minutes. But it's the funniest thing you've ever seen. Like, he has these fans, and he's like putting pepper on eggs, and the pepper's just flowing onto the audience, and everyone in the audience is sneezing.
Oh.
It's and I was just like, wow, this guy, this is like just situational. There's no verbal and it's silent. And I
Mm,
was just pissing myself. I was like, this is hilarious. So
mm,
yeah, so I'm finding like the actual archetype of the clowns are like popping up
mm,
in other arenas. So yeah, so it's very the trickster figure. I mean, I almost consider Trump as like a weird trickster figure. Like, depending on how you look at things.
mm.
Because I've started just viewing the world we're in as some kind of weird, absurdist. I don't know, like this reality sitcom, interdimensional
Yeah, I get it.
show. Like,
I
I'm
get it.
like, this is
Yeah.
so weird. Like, it's just So yeah, I think it really depends on the eye of the beholder to some degree. But yeah, I'm gonna sit with that actually. I want to. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, the idea of disconnecting to reconnect. You've obviously experienced the power of this in a very real way, which in one sense has been, a theme, a major part of your journey that you detail in your book, No More Trippin'. disconnecting to
Yep.
find some shred of reconnection from your time helping out in Nepal, in the disaster zones with the earthquake relief work, picking up the
Yeah.
rubble and the rocks and day after day, and eventually going through that profound rite of passage, developing a tiny baby little callus on your hand for the very first time in your life. Actually, I've got that. Can I read a little part from your book? I've got
Yeah,
that page
sure.
doggy. It's bookmarked in here. Where is it? Here it is. Even though I'd spent 8 hours digging through rubble while baking in the sun like an apple pie, at least it was real and alive. It had been something I'd been unconsciously thirsting for. I looked at my hands. There was a callus on my palm. It wasn't big, but it was big enough to qualify as one. A sense of achievement blossomed from my descending scrotum. Despite the masturbation marathon that had been my comedy career, this was my first callus. I stared at it, my chest inflating with pride. Finally, my 33 years of childhood had just come to an end. Much like the indigenous people who received deep, indelible, initiatory wounds to mark their passage into adulthood, the magnificent microcallus smarting on my palm was a signifying scar. I was no longer a boy. I was some kind of half boy, half man-child type creature who just picked up bricks all day in the burning sun. First time I read that, I was howling.
Oh, thanks, man.
So there's that, and there's all the volunteer work in like the palliative care ward and everything that came after that with the plant medicine path, and also including disconnecting from the plant medicine world to reconnect. So that's a
Yeah.
whole conversation there too. I don't know where you want
Oh,
to take
yeah,
any
yeah.
of that, but
No,
yeah,
no.
yeah, essentially what we were saying before, you've been making all these videos kind of that touch on some of these threads of inquiry, the myth of progress, the emergence of this city-flavored consciousness, these sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that just started out where there was a lot of stuff that I had wanted to talk about on stage, but people would just be like, "What are you talking about?" So I was like, I just needed to get it out somewhere. I realized that like I needed to just put it somewhere, so I just started recording these videos, and I'm just trying to, I don't know, I guess. You're on sort of the healing path and knowledge path,
Mm.
and it's like, what do you do with all this knowledge? It just sits inside of you, and yeah, I just needed to get it out there. So I guess a lot of this is about just this. The plants very early on told me that there was 5 levels of disconnection going on in our culture, which was between disconnection between self, nature, ancestry, community, and spirit,
Mm.
and they're all interlinked. Um, and so a lot of my path was like learning to reconnect to these basic ways of being. And as I did that, I suddenly realized that I was like coming into like what I'd call health, or wellness. It's a
Mm.
bit of a hack term, but like even just the other day, like I've been in the city now for a few weeks, and I had this like low level anxiety for like, and I couldn't work out what it was. I was like, what is this? Is this some childhood thing, or is this some kind of what's going on? And
Right.
then I went to get some spring water, and I just ended up meeting this very lovely lady who was kind of on the same page as me. And we had a good chat about what was going on. And I felt so much better. And I was like, oh, I just needed to connect to someone in
Mm.
nature. That was really about it. So it's
Right.
like, yeah. So I don't know. I think a lot of the mental illnesses that people have these days, that's a gross generalization, but, the depression and anxiety is actually just from disconnection, and to actually try and treat the symptoms through like drugs or even medicine to some degree. Like I was serving medicine in Sydney for like a couple of years, several years ago, and I found that a lot of the same people would come back again and
Mm.
again, and
Is this
it was
pre-Darwin
like
times, or was it kind of in between?
pre-Darwin times. Yeah,
Right.
you someone be like, "Wow, my depression's been cured, my anxiety's been cured," blah 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 blah, and then they'd sort of go back to their a Sydney Matrix life, living in an apartment and doing the same job that they didn't really like, and they'd be back in 3 months, being, "Man, I just don't feel good again." And I'm like,
Mm.
"Oh, I think that's because of it's environmental. It's not an internal and individual thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been this big process on like um, just learning about these different levels of disconnection, and how to actually live in balance in a world that's clearly out of balance, and even me just trying to live in the city, um, to do comedy, I need to get out like once a week and
Yeah.
just go sit in the bush, and just tech detox and all that sort of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a very interesting procedure, and just like the indigenous have this term called sick country. They believe that some areas of land that you're on
Mm.
make you sick. And I was in Western Australia, and they were telling us about the sick country that was there, and you always pass through, you never stay there. And then
Right.
the settlers ended up living there, and they all died of cancer because there was uranium basically just below the surface. So they
Mm.
knew,
Mm-hmm.
And then coming to the city, I was just, that's all I could think of. I was like, oh man, this is like sick country. Like all the energy lines have been broken. This land's been, raped and pillaged. There's been untold traumas, massacres and stuff happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been sort of taken over by the machine,
Mm-hmm.
um, not to demonize the machine. Like, I'm starting to think that maybe this disconnection is part of a bigger process as well. Like it was meant to have happened this way. Like
Yeah, we're currently
I
in the
had,
birthing canal of something to come, but while you're in it,
yeah.
it's not that great.
Well, it is great on some level. I mean, like, I love sushi, and
Pros and the
there's
cons, right?
benefits to it. But sorry, yeah, it swings and
Pros and the
roundabouts.
cons. That's actually, I've heard you speak about sushi a couple of times on podcasts, I think. So there's something to that.
I moved from burritos to sushi. This is growth, but
The big transition, right?
yeah, yeah. But I think you're right. We are in this birthing process, and maybe we had to go far into this level of disconnection to develop certain, technological and mental abilities, and we've kind of reached the end point of that, and then maybe we're going to now swing back the other way and then synthesize some kind of new combination. But I don't know. I think there might have to be a bit of a not such a good times ahead. The birth canal.
Yeah, well,
I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, it's anyone's guess at this stage. And I mean, there's a lot to be said there about all of the environmental factors, from the poisoning of our waters and the herbicides, the pesticides, the rodenticides, the non-native electromagnetic frequencies, like on and on and on it goes. But there's also that psychological component too, where you were talking about this myth of progress and the myth of it being a good thing, a healthy thing. Like, you've got to be getting ahead, otherwise you're falling behind. And I think,
Yeah.
man, I think you articulated your thoughts really well in that video there. And if you're in any state to try and rehash or kind of riff on that, because it's great stuff. Like, you're obviously aware of the memo in this day and age. There's a lot to do. There's lots to achieve. We've got money to make. We've got rent to pay. There's creative visions that want to be born.
Yeah, I mean, I got stuck in that coming back into Sydney because I was like, oh shit, I got to do comedy, and I got to be, a year. I got to somehow get, my foothold back in the industry, and I got to get a Netflix special, and I got really sucked into that again for like 2 months, and it's kind of like, it's not healthy. I got a chest infection for 6 weeks, so I I had to cancel like 4 weeks worth of gigs,
Right.
and just going on stage hack coughing, trying to make it. And I just was like, what is this disease, And I spent 5 years in Darwin, and it was some of the happiest years of my life, because in Darwin, there's just not any sense of competition there. It's like a third of the population there are Indigenous people, so they just so do not live in that sort of, okay, I've got to achieve something and be something in the world. They're like literally just hanging out in the park and just being, and, practicing culture or just hanging out with each other. They just really prize relation over accomplishments or doing, And I was watching this really interesting documentary about this guy who lived with the pygmies, and he said, this is really nice. He said, like, they spend about 4 hours a day doing the farming and getting hunting, and the rest of the time they're just hanging out. And they're doing ceremony, dancing, and just hanging out with their friends and family and just like bonding. And I was like, wow, just like not even. And so it really became conscious to me, especially because I spent like, 3 months in Sydney, and then I went straight up to Northern Rivers. And there's a bit of that vibe too. Everyone's just like, yeah, fuck the rat race. This is like, so I remember just stepping out of the car, and my entire nervous system just was like, just relaxed. And I really got to see that sort of mindset, and it's propelled by social media as well, and yeah, I had a friend who moved to Sydney as well from Darwin, and he was just like, man, I don't know, I just have a really low self-esteem here. I don't know, I don't know why. And we had a talk. I was like, I was starting to feel that as well. It's like I kind of had to move back in with my parents for a bit, and I was just like, I'm 42. What the fuck is going on?
Mm.
And there's people just the corporate shark sort of people just killing it, walking around Bondi. Everyone's like really good at city life, or at least really good at pretending. And so you have this comparison mentality as well, is what I noticed. You're like comparing yourself all the time. And people are forever sizing you up, going, okay, is this person worth my time and money to invest in? What can he get me?
Mm-hmm.
So I really noticed people stop becoming people. They just become like these stepping stones, or these, it becomes extractive. It's an extractive way of living. It's not, there's no humanity left. And then so moving up to the Northern Rivers area, and spending a bit more time there, I was just like, oh, people smile at you in the street and they're just a bit more human, and it's not about like, it's more cooperative than like dominate us sort of stuff. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I don't know if
I mean, some people can survive that and they love that, but I would say that from what I've seen, because I was away from Sydney for 6 years, it's just increased. So I believe that this sort of matrix system is self-selecting for sociopathic psychopaths to succeed. That's my opinion.
Jeez,
so I'm like, maybe it's splitting. I think it's splitting where like there'll be the separate race of sociopathic corporate psychopath shark people, and who will live in like these technocratic surveillance states. This is my paranoia. And then there'll be like this sort of more kind of community orientated survivalist hippie sort of tribes who are like, yeah, fuck, man, I don't know what's going on. Let's try and build something. So that's what I feel.
Well, I'm curious about that too, whether we split off into two camps, and there are the people who are ushered off to live in all the smart cities, and then the other people who are interested in regenerative living and smaller communities and revival of culture and these sorts of things. But I don't know if it's a kudos and a congratulations or a condolences to you, mate, for being back in the big smoke.
Well, I'm only here for another month, and then I'm moving up to Byron Bay. No. Become an influencer. No. I'm moving to Lennox Heads.
A fitness model.
No. I'm I've still got a gut, and I do hill sprints every day, and I've still got a gut. So I'm like, what the fuck can you do?
Okay, well, yeah, all right. Fitness model, park that to the side for just a moment. There's still time.
Yeah.
In between the second book that you're working on.
Yeah, the second book.
Yeah, grappling some of the big questions, mate. Like, how did we get to where we are now in this radical state of disconnection? What were the steps? The great forgetting, as you put it. And then when you told me that, I essentially said, yeah, we hear a lot of these phrases that are used, like the great turning, the great revealing, the great awakening, but it seems like you could say that maybe they're all kind of present focused, but also future oriented too. But then if we're talking about the great forgetting, well, it seems like that precedes all of that. What have we forgotten? Why is it important to pay attention to what it is that we've forgotten?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the biggest things which I sort of remember from my initial plant medicine journeys was like, it was like I was remembering stuff. It wasn't like I was learning new things. It was like stuff I always knew somehow. And then it's like, oh yeah, oh shit, that's right. And then I started just, looking into this whole process of like, okay, how did we actually get to this point? It's a huge topic, probably 10 podcasts worth from what I've been. And there's so many different angles on it. Like, a big part of it, I think, is also the disembodiment of our physical bioenergetic systems, like how much everyone's stuck in their heads in the West, especially in the civilized world. And that is a form of control in a way. And like, how did we lose connection with our bodies so much? Like, a big part of my journey was after leaving my body every week for about a year with ayahuasca, then coming back into my body through a combination of qigong and iboga, which taught me a lot about how stuck in our minds, and the culture we're in right now is pretty much what I'd say is like the ultimate incarnation of a mind intellect directed culture, you know.
Mm.
Even my qigong master was telling me that he's had to change his whole system to basically suit people who spend 12 hours a day, well, not 12 hours, but like 6 to 8 hours a day in front of a computer, you know.
Yeah.
So that's not natural. And then I was just hanging out with my friend's kids yesterday, you know, and I was like, whoa, these kids are really embodied. Like, kids are just naturally in their body, you know. And then something happens around the 8-year-old mark, and then suddenly the mind and the self-awareness starts happening. Some people attribute this to like the written word, like language faculties, develop these higher faculties. My Boga teacher actually believes that it's an extra cosmic mind parasite, luciferic mind parasite.
Okay.
Which I can kind of see. Yeah, it's like she calls it the mind parasite, and there's a lot of talk of in various esoterica from around the world of this what they call the deceiver, or the counterfeit spirit, this sort of default mode network sort of mental parasite, the mind that sort of you know you can kind of see it in people who have a lot of depression. You know, they tend to overthink a lot. You know, there's this sort of almost and I had this as well. I still occasionally have these sort of dips into this sort of way of being, and it's like this. At the moment, I'm actually in this relationship where it's the healthiest relationship I've been in, and I've been watching this mental part of me which runs on fear, like constantly trying to sabotage it, always trying to tell me why it's not going to work out. And I'm like, what is this voice in my head? You know, my heart says yes, and my heart feels good, and yet this mind thing is like trying to throw me off. So there's a part of that which I feel like the mind parasite. I was studying this embodiment stuff, and the guy was talking about how the structure of society right now, like the hierarchical patriarchy, is reflective of also the average human body, where the mind is in charge. Basically, the mind is like basically a fascist. The mind never wants to let go of control, and so the mind will fight tooth and nail to remain in control. And I've seen this in people's processes, you know, where the mind will talk them out of doing things which would get them back into their body. Will also be the source of addictions, I believe, in a lot of cases. The mind's, to pacify that mind, you'll take drugs or have lots of sex or get drunk or whatever. And so yeah, I mean, I don't have the full answers of how that happened to be. I think it was very gradual, and I was listening to this guy who was talking about how technology is not neutral. Like the invention of the plow also was very instrumental in basically pulling us out of a hunter-gatherer culture where we're all animists and we believed everything was spirit.
Agriculturally speaking, the plow, right?
Yeah, the agriculture basically, and the technologies are neutral. And then we had the plow, and all of a sudden you had to decimate the trees, and then you had to whip your oxen into place, and you couldn't believe the oxen had a spirit if you were going to be whipping it all day. So then that created this sort of more, and then also you started having reserves of food, which then created distribution of wealth and then power, and then so I'm like, okay, well, and I don't want to like romanticize that indigenous life was some kind of walk in the park, because I was living in the territory. There's tribal conflict all the time, and all sorts of crazy shit happening there, and pretty full on stuff which happens in those camps as well. So I don't think that was necessarily an idealistic paradise, but
it's definitely hyper romanticized in this day and age, returning back to indigenous living and indigenous culture.
Oh, for sure. But like, I mean, it was harsh, man. It was like some of the practices they did. My friend was telling me, I don't know if this is true or not, but my friend was telling me that in some tribes in Western Australia, like if you had twins, one of those twins would be sacrificed because it was a desert region, and they couldn't afford to keep two kids alive. So it's just. Are
they saying this is still happening in today's day and age, or it was happening?
Oh, no, I don't know, but that's just what my friend.
That's what you heard. Okay,
that's what I heard. And then some of the initiation processes up in Arnhem Land are like, they're pretty full on, man. I'm not able to speak about them because I don't want to disrespect the culture, but like when I heard about them, I'm like, ooh, that's not very.
Right.
I wouldn't want that to happen to me.
Was it easy for you to come by that knowledge? Or was it through your prolonged kind of developing relationships in those communities that the kind of information and knowledge and stories
Some
were
of it's
shared?
pretty commonly known. Yeah. And then you just hear stories, if you spend there long enough. And I had friends who were, indigenous, and,
Mm,
I talked to them, and some stuff they can share and other stuff they can't. And, you
mm,
don't press, of course. You just,
mm,
if stuff comes your way, then it comes your way. So, yeah. So, but I got a reality of it, and
mm,
there's long-standing intertribal feuds up that way, So
mm,
there was some element of warring happening.
mm,
I don't know how often, but it wasn't like um, some kind of paradise, I guess. Maybe in some areas. I mean, I went to the cultural center in the Northern Rivers area, and they said it was pretty good. Apparently,
The
those
cultural
first
center. The
settlers,
cultural center was pretty good.
yeah, the first settlers had like their reports just going. These guys live a pretty good life. They just lie by the river all day, and they eat game, and then they spend a lot of their time just hanging out, and even the
Mm.
Aboriginal men there would just spend a lot of their time decorating their beards with flowers and stuff. And I was like, fuck, even the indigenous people there were hippies, So must be something in the land. They had pictures of it. It was very funny. They had like flowers all in their hair, and I was just like, wow, there's something in that
That
land that
sounds
just
great.
creates it.
Mm,
Yeah. So I think it varies. I think a lot of it actually has to do with the plenitude of food.
mm.
Yeah. So in areas with a lot of food and game, you'll tend to get these more decentralized, non-hierarchical indigenous societies, from
Mm.
what I can understand. Yeah,
So, and
yeah.
how long have you been researching and writing this second book that you're working on?
I started writing it to avoid finishing the first one.
Oh, I see.
So, and also I started. It was about it's about my years with the boga, because I got quite obsessed with that plant. And also it was a sort of a descent phase, a descent into like a lot of people talk about the ascension, and for me, I started finding it was the opposite direction. It was about the descension. It was like coming into the body. It was coming into the earth instead of
Hmm.
leaving the earth. Like I
Hmm.
kept meeting all these Pleiadians who were like, "Oh, I'm from the Pleiades, and I just want to go back to the Pleiades." I was like, "Well, go back to the Pleiades. Why did you come to Earth then?" So that whole book is kind of like this time I spent working with I helped detox my friend, my heroin friend, who's a 20-year junkie. I was there just to help out with his process, and I was like, whoa, shit, this is like
Mm.
a class A demonic possession,
Right.
And I was just meeting all these kind of people where I was like, fuck, what's going on, man? These people like sort of like cursed in a way, and
Mm. Mm.
I got this big download that we were like sort of fallen angels. So it's kind of a book about like, I'm trying to satirize these times that we're in. And I'll talk about all these kind of experiences I had in the real world, or whatever you want to call the real world.
Hmm.
And then at the same time, there's a parallel plot about, it's like kind of a parody about the fall from grace, So it's all about
Mm.
us being angels in another realm.
Hmm.
And then we tried to overthrow the false god. This is getting pretty complicated, because we started eating the tree of knowledge,
Hmm.
which is the iboga, in the garden. But
Uh-huh.
then we get addicted to it, and we know too much and realize that he's kind of like and this links into that the great forgetting, which is this idea that this world is kind of like it's been slightly corrupted. Something didn't quite happen in its download into the physical realm. There was an
Mm.
intercept, which is a Gnostic point of view,
Hmm.
which is basically this false god known as Yaldabaoth, who is like the Old Testament god, is not the real god. It's actually like a kind of like a middle management false god who sort
Uh-huh.
of doesn't have the power of creation. He kind of intercepted creation, and this is why things are kind of a bit screwy in this realm.
A bit screwy.
Um, yeah, and so you read about this interpretation where Satan tried to overthrow Yaldabaoth. He actually had a third of the host of angels, which in my head I was like, that's a lot of the angels, like maybe there was an actual management issue up
Mm.
there. If a
Hmm.
third of the angels like, yeah, this is really fucked. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so there's this idea that history's written in the eyes of the victor. So
Hmm.
maybe I actually don't like using the word Satan because I actually do believe there is a sort of very evil force out there. So I wouldn't say him, but there was, this attempt to try and wrest
Hmm.
creation back into the ways of benevolence and love and
Mm.
truth. But I think maybe they lost, and so we were cast down. And so that's the Earth plot, that everything that I was going through, because I went through a very dark and testing time.
Mm.
And I was meeting all these individuals who were like just sort of like just going through hell. So this is
Mm.
the idea that we were all once angels, but we lost the fight. So this was our punishment. It's a comedy. It's a comedy, though.
It sounds like an interesting and complex convergence that's going on there.
Yeah. It just started coming out of me in the middle of this really terrible depression. Yeah,
Mm. Mm. Hey,
yeah,
so you were talking about this remembrance that happens in plant medicine experiences. I
yeah,
reckon this is a common theme. It certainly is for me, and I know it is for a lot of other people too. The the felt sense of remembrance, and it really feels like a remembrance of something. But oftentimes for myself, there's nothing to really hold onto of what it is actually that I'm remembering. Do you get that as
yeah,
well? It's
yeah.
it's nebulous, but there's the felt sense of it. It's like I'm returning to something. I'm being reoriented or reorganized in a way where I'm coming back to some kind of originality or some kind of truth or wisdom within myself,
Yeah,
a remembrance.
yeah,
So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? What's going on?
yeah. I feel like it's you're coming back into full connection for this period of time,
Mm.
But then, like, because the world at the moment is profoundly based in disconnection, you can
Mm.
only hold on to it for as long as so long on some level.
Mm.
So I feel there's part of that,
And then I reckon
and
with the
there's
remembrance comes an understanding too. Like sometimes there'll be streams of symbols that come across the eyelids of my consciousness or coming into contact with beings who will offer me a glowing orb or something like this, these kind of themes. And there'll be an understanding of what this is, like a bone deep wisdom and understanding. Yet I'll often come out of those experiences and find it very, very difficult to articulate what that understanding or remembrance actually is.
Yeah, I think because a lot of those understandings are beyond language. You can't capture them in words. Metaphors are kind of the best
Mm.
um, tools, but like it's just this kind of deep knowing,
Mm.
and kind of like this. I don't know. You kind of get this trust and faith in a way, but then it fades. Well, it fades if all you're doing is plant medicine, and then so there's. I think this is where the daily work comes in, where you're trying to like adapt your nervous system and your life to become more permanently in balance. And um, yeah, having met some people who I believe have attained some degree of that, you know, I was like, oh, okay, so you can sort of be in the world but not of it. It
Mm.
just takes a lot of work, maybe, and maybe a bit more living. But
Mhm.
my boga teacher, she was very much a bit like a Zen priest, in the way that she carried herself in the world, and was, and some of it actually has to be in the body as well, like coming into deep into your body as well is like
Mm.
um, a big part of it, I think. So, and then there's also just other stuff like where I felt like I was remembering like my true self as like a extra cosmic um, being, or as an emanation of my
Mm.
true spiritual nature. And
Mm.
I remember a big part of that book is like I spent most of my life, as a scientific materialist nihilist. I didn't believe in anything. It's all like bullshit.
Mm.
And then a big part of my journey was just this one trip where I just remembered. It was basically being shown like the whole Vedic conception of the universe, like this whole rebirth cycle, the wheel of
Mm.
life. And I mean, that could have been my cultural bias. I have Tibetan heritage and
Uh-huh.
a lot of dunkers hanging up in my family home and stuff like that. But it was just this sudden realization. It's like, oh no, that shit's all true. Like, but on a very felt sense level, like it just sort of was like, oh yeah, that's true. And then that whole belief system just dropped away. So, I mean, in some ways, that kind of belief system could be also a part of the sort of the forgetting of everything. It just sort of cuts that whole world out.
Yeah, I hear. And then, of course, the title of the book, No Mo Trippin', it's the idea of disconnecting from the plant medicines to find some kind of reconnection, just as we might find ourselves disconnecting from, however you want to call it, the matrix or the main socio-cultural dominator consciousness paradigm, to reconnect with some essence of ourselves. And one of the ways that we often do that is through the plant medicines or through the entheogenic sacraments, however you want to language them. But yeah, there can be a point where the line might be crossed and a disconnect from that world needs to happen to reconnect to something else, something perhaps more tangible than we had been in that plant medicine realm.
Yeah, for sure. And like, yeah, definitely. I mean, I crossed that line, which is why I wrote that book and got that tattoo.
Where's the is it on your wrist, the tattoo?
Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I mean, now I interpret it as like tripping is like, escapism,
Yeah.
There's healing and then there's bypassing. And I've definitely seen this in the scene. And, I'm not judging anyone because I went through it myself. And I think it's maybe even as part of the stage of the path, But there was definitely a point where, I don't know, especially when it becomes your job, I started just really enjoying not tripping all the time, So, and just realizing that the plants were taking me to a certain point, but no further, I was like, I just couldn't, there was just certain things that I couldn't heal. And I realized it was because a lot of this stuff I needed relational healing, like the plants are sometimes very much just you and the plant and you're in the bush.
You're talking about relationship, like human to human. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Like, and so then I started, just anything from psychotherapy with like a really good therapist to like, I did a bunch of tantra retreats, which was so healing between me and my issues with the feminine and both internal and external.
Yep.
And that was no medicine. I was fully having these ayahuasca type experiences just through eye gazing, where all these women were becoming women from my life. And I was able to like almost psychically work out, issues that I'd had with my mom or issues that I'd had with the feminine, just spontaneously through this and I was crying and I was like, whoa, shit, this is just from connection. This is not, I think we had a bit of cacao, but
yeah,
I was like, this woman's face was turning into like animals and shit like that. And I was just like, it was profound. I was staring at this woman's yoni and I was seeing like galaxies and stars and stuff like that. And I was being shown very tantrically, this is the portal of all creation. And so, so there was a point where I realized that these very deep core wounds were not being treated and I needed to do something else. So I kind of took a 2-year hiatus off the plants. And I just went on this sort of crusade. I was just like, fuck it. I need to work this out. I've got the money. I've got the time. Let's just try and do it. So I just tried to do everything. Martial arts was very important because, as I said in my history, I was teased a lot, and that was very foundational to many of my deepest issues. And so I had to learn how to fight, So I went to do this Muay Thai camp for like 3-4 months in Thailand with this spiritual Muay Thai teacher, which was really amazing. And also just finding teachers as well, like actually people who were further along in the path, who were embodying in like a kinesthetic felt sense what it meant to be grounded or what it meant to be like awakened on a healthy level was really important, just so I knew what that felt like. And what else? I did a vision quest, which was really transformative because it taught me that I could get to the same place without taking anything. So that actually, that was very instrumental in breaking my dependency on the plant medicines and I'm seeing this with a lot of people in the scene. You come from a background of addiction, I don't know how many people have I met who used to be hardcore ravers or hardcore warehouse partiers. And then they sort of have their crisis and then they end up in the plant medicine scene and it becomes kind of like a replacement. And then you kind of become dependent on the medicine, and you can so to then just go out and sit on country for 4 days and, just drink water, not leave a 5 meter space. And then I got to pretty much the same place as I got to post Iboga flood dose, like this stillness, this clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to spirit. I got all my questions answered, got very deep downloads, and came out of there just like, oh shit, okay, this is how they've been doing it for thousands of years without plant medicines.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I started preferring that more grounded state, because sometimes you can kind of get addicted to the more vata
Mm-hmm.
area, sort of manic
Mm-hmm.
serotonin highs of like ayahuasca and all that sort of stuff. And I really started not wanting that anymore. I was just like, oh, I actually just feel like it when my nervous system is like relaxed and I'm actually feeling
Mm-hmm.
not crazy. So
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
mean, I spend a lot of time with people who are involved more so in the world of, let's just say, cactus related
oh
entheogenic experiences. And then also to have that comparison with cactus as opposed to some other plant medicines, let's say ayahuasca, which does seem to have a quality of catapulting you out, a sense of
yeah,
disembodiment
yeah,
in a state to some intergalactic realms. And of course, it's not always like that, but I noticed that it certainly is a common thread and that there can be a sense of a lot of, to use the elemental charts, there's a lot of air in these people. They're
yeah,
not so much very grounded. Whereas I find that people who work with, or at least the people that I've been spending time with that work with a lot of cactus, that medicine certainly has the qualities and the capacity to help anchor in or enact a sense of embodiment and a deeper connection to the natural
yeah.
world around us rather than catapulting us out of it.
I would agree. Like I would find like ayahuasca is like hot up here,
Mm-hmm.
and then the iboga is like the sacral, the stomach down to the base, and
Mm-hmm.
then the cactus is like heart and gut, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's like this center point. And I have found that there's a lot of drama and politics in the ayahuasca scene, and a lot of projection and fucking crazy conflict all the time. And it's, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a bit crazy, but I've always found the cactus folk I've hung out with, it's just a lot more grounded and practical and heart centered, and
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of reason with them a lot more. So if anything, yeah, that's kind of one of the, I occasionally work with the medicines, like, Aya, not so much anymore. Like, I'll drink that maybe a couple times a year,
Mm-hmm.
more for healing purposes, because like it
Mm.
is a very good bodily healing as a tool for spiritual ascension. I think it's too tricky now. So,
Bit more of
but
a
in terms
plug-in
of,
for a bit of a tune-up.
yeah, but on a bodily level, like it's very good for just, I think, health,
Mm.
and so I look at it more as a healing tool more than a spiritual development tool, which I think is very chaotic sometimes. And those
Mm-hmm.
astral realms, they just go on forever, and I don't know enough about them, and I never will, to try and navigate that space. So, but yeah, the cactus. I guess, yeah, I was running a few of them when I was running in Darwin, and again, that was just, it was a nature immersion sort of tool, So I was taking them out on country to these really amazing regions that I knew,
Mm-hmm.
and we just connect to nature, and you can talk to the rocks and talk to the trees, and that experience for like people who hadn't done that before, where I was like, all right, well, we're gonna go in a country, and and I run them through some exercises to like learn how to talk to trees, which I know sounds very deep hippie, but it's a fucking thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's this guy called Stephen Harrod Buhner who developed these
Mm-hmm.
meditation techniques to basically connect to trees, and you can get very clear answers and very profound communications with them. And that was just blowing people's minds. They're like, I didn't know I could talk to nature. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's sentient.
I'm looking
It's
at one of
it's
his books
wanting to.
now, The Secret Teachings of Plants. I referenced it in a recent talk or a video that I did, and the subtitle is The Direct Perception, or what is it? The intelligence of nature in the direct perception of the heart, or something like that. So
That's the one.
he
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, he lays it out very,
yeah,
very clearly in that book, the importance of transitioning from, let's say, head-based or brain-based consciousness into a more somatic or heart-based, and then even
yeah, yeah.
extrasensory modes of perception to be able to communicate with other species that aren't this human-to-human species that we think we're only relegated to.
That's it. That's it. The head isolates. The head's very much the individual, the ego, and then the heart's very much empathic. It's about oneness and unity. So
Mm, mm.
yeah, that's exactly the exercise I'd run people through. And you don't need to take cactus to do it. I was also doing it with cacao, and then you can do it straight as well. It's just sometimes a bit harder for people who are more in their heads. So I just found the plants were just sort of training wheels.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people would just, be profoundly moved
Mm,
by just being able to communicate to the trees. And the messages they were getting was just like, they were blowing me away. I was just like, some of the, I don't want to share them because they're kind of their confidential experiences, but like,
mm.
it was just a really powerful lesson, So yeah, definitely a big fan of the cactus. I think he's
Yeah.
actually a very good ally to have during these times because life right now is like an ayahuasca trip, to be honest. So
Mm,
I got this big message like, yeah,
mm.
everyone's already tripping already right now. So
No more tripping.
no more
Stop the
tripping.
tripping.
Well, no more, less tripping.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about the great forgetting and then this sense of remembrance, there's something to be said about these catalysts or these activators of certain types of consciousness. We're talking about plant medicines or sacramental entheogens here. But then what I've found in my experience and what I notice in countless others is that there can be a relationship that is developed where that it opens up the portals so that if you have these other types of experiences, particularly what I was reflecting on this when you were speaking to your experiences of Tantra, the experiences that you were
Yeah.
having and without anything, I find that within myself, the portals, or you can talk about it probably from some kind of neuroscientific point of view. I don't know what that would be because I'm not a neuroscientist, obviously, but maybe there's neurological pathways that are opening up, or perhaps there's something in conjunction with the energetic components of the bioenergetics of the body, where it just seems like the portals are open and then more, you become more, or at least I become more sensitive to a lot of these subtle and nuanced energies in the field where I don't need as much plant medicine as I did
Oh yeah, yeah.
10 years ago. I remember when I
No, I
first come back from working with ayahuasca and then started vaporizing a lot of cannabis again and working with cannabis as an ally and a tool for self-introspection and journaling. And I was kind of pairing cannabis with things like breath work, float tanks, these sorts of things. And it would not take me much at all to go into very, very deep experiences that were certainly akin to some of the deeper ayahuasca and Wachuma experiences that I just had, a couple of months prior.
Oh man, yeah, yeah. I've had similar. I hadn't had cannabis for ages, like this is a few years ago, and then I had one puff, and it was like a DMT experience, and I was like, oh shit, I just wanted to like relax, and now I'm seeing fractals, and I've had really interesting experiences where towards the end of my facilitation career with ayahuasca, I wasn't really drinking it anymore. And as an experiment, I just ran a ceremony straight, and fuck, man, I started seeing the patterns. I could feel when everyone else was going in,
Mm,
and
mm,
so that was what really surprised me when I actually started seeing like the chrysanthemum stuff happening, like not fully in my face, but like strong enough for me to notice it. And I was like, what's going on here? This is like clearly, you know,
mm,
if you've done the plants enough, they're inside of you, and I definitely think, yeah, those are pathways that you can open up if you work with them for long
mm.
enough. And I mean, if I was reading about the Huachumeros in Peru, you have to drink it like twice a week or something for like a couple of years or something. So that's definitely gonna carve that into you. So
Yeah, I've been there, that's
yeah,
for sure.
I can tell by a thousand yards there.
Well, so you mentioned tuning in with ayahuasca for that bit of a somatic tune-up a couple of times a year, but then you
Yeah,
also mentioned coming to the end of your ayahuasca facilitation career. So where are you at with your connection to plant medicines now, or I mean the ingestion or connection? Yeah.
I usually wait for them to use them now.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I mean, I kind of just sort of wait, but I had this very interesting experience maybe a month ago where uh, I pretty much had a full blown flood experience off maybe a couple grams of iboga. And this is where I believe that once you've worked with these medicines long enough, they're inside of you. And
mm,
I wasn't planning on it. It was literally just to practice my drumming. I just felt like I needed to just do some rhythm
mm,
and connect to the medicine just a little bit and sit in nature. because I was wanting a bit of guidance, and basically what would have been about a tenth of a full flood dose was enough to fling me into a 2-day unexpected process, which was actually a course correction. I got some very clear guidelines on where I had to go next. So that was unplanned, but I just felt that that's what he needed to come through at that point in time to give me a bit of a teaching and a bit of a course correction. So but my process now is I've been through all these processes. I've gotten all this knowledge, so now I have to bring it back into the world. Otherwise, it's like, what's the fucking point, And that probably started last year, where, and I try and time it now. So if I'm doing some kind of sober practice, like last year I did, internal martial arts qigong sort of course, and then a couple of days after I decided to work with peyote, and that was an amazing combination. I just went so deep. And that was actually the journey where it's like, all right, man, you're done. You're healed. Congratulations. Why don't you do something with this stuff now? And,
you get the certificate that you can put on your wall, frame it, the big red, the big red stamp.
Yeah. No, I was literally constipated through the whole trip. And he's like, this is what you're like. You're full of knowledge, but nothing's coming out. So it's you have to now go into the world and fertilize the garden. So I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I still love and respect them, and they'll always have a place in my heart. But definitely, I think this next phase is about coming back into the world. I've gone through my non-traditional initiatory experience, and maybe there'll be another phase later on in my life. I don't really know, but I definitely feel like I'm full of all this shit, and now I got to just grow some flowers.
And the Northern Rivers is the place for that.
Well, that's what
Maybe
Boga
so.
told me. Well, yeah, it feels good there. The land spoke to me there. Yeah, there's a lot of switched on people that way. Like in Sydney, I felt very much like an alien. There's not many people who are really, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are, but it was hard for me to find them, But in Northern Rivers, there's a lot more people on the same page. And also just a lot of my friends are up there. I realized a lot of my really good friends from the healing scene, and I wanted to spend more time with them and find your tribe, find the others. Well, in Sydney,
sure.
I mean, they're around, but there's just Sydney traffic you got to fight against. You got to sit in traffic for 2 hours to get to your friends.
Yeah, Sydney's not the place for me, but then again, no cities are.
Yeah. If you've been drinking Wachuma every second day for a couple of years.
Hey, well, on that thread of connection to the land, I'm going to be heading up to the Red Centre for the first time, making my own pilgrimage.
Oh,
that's in September, and that's going to be for a vision quest. And I'd love to hear your reflections here, actually, from your time living up in NT. What was your relationship like, or like your perception, your connection to the various nature spirits, nature deities, spiritual energies, metaphysical influences around the area? Like, what can you say about your approach, your interactions, your relationships with these kind of energies, if any?
Yeah, I would say they're very much more alive up there. Like, you can notice it when I was driving from Darwin to Sydney. You can notice the land, like the energy lines getting broken. You can see it in people's faces. The further south, the further out of that, they're not happy. People aren't happy. Some people are, but I mean the general mean masses. But I found that the nature spirits, and this is where it's like this new age where people like yourself and I, where we're not indigenous people, but we have a genuine want to try and connect to these energies, and they're glad. I honestly feel like they're happy that there's a genuine, if your heart is pure and you're not trying to. And I was getting taught a lot of lessons just from being on the land, for example, if I'd be collecting incense from from the cypress pine trees, which is this amazing resin. It smells amazing. And if I got too extractive or too greedy, I'd get this, like, a stick would poke me in the eye or something, or, I just get this slap and be like, what are you doing? So a lot of my healing actually up in Northern Territory was like learning how to talk to country and how to connect to that. And that was all very spontaneous. I was just sitting on country, and a lot of time during COVID, I just didn't want to stay in the house. So I just go fast naturally in the woods. And yeah, a lot of the lore is still up there. I heard so many crazy stories about the little hairy men that are still active in the area. I've had encounters with like land spirits on medicine. I had this one experience where this is when I was very much neophyte, and I was working with this acacia medicine, and I was singing. I'd gone online and I'd found out the songline story to the acacia medicine, and so I
Mm.
was singing this song, which I probably didn't have permission to do. And then this 10-foot tall black male Aboriginal spirit just bent over my right shoulder, and he was just like, "You shouldn't be singing about this boy." And I was like, "Whoa!" And I was just was
Whoa.
so clear,
Mm.
like sometimes you meet the entities, they're very two-dimensional. This was like physically next to me,
Mm-hmm.
and I apologized and gave tobacco into the fire. And then a month later, I met a guy who was working with the indigenous, and he started telling me about the tall ones. And I was like, "What are the tall ones?" He goes, "Well, there's a class of spirits. They're about 8, 9, 10 foot tall. They're tall, dark male, and they tell you off if you've been like breaking law. They're like the law
Mm.
keepers."
Mm.
I was like, "Holy shit, that's what I encountered out there." So, and I didn't know anything about them.
Hmm.
So this stuff it's in the land, and it's wanting to be used and communicated.
Mm.
I do feel there's realms of like both healing and like magic, which I'm not sure if it applies to me, like as a non-indigenous Australian person. Like some of the experiences that I was learning, especially about sorcery
Mm-hmm.
and black magic, which a lot of that's kind of going on at the moment sometimes. Well, um, there was talk about how magic didn't seem to affect the white fellas sometimes.
Hmm.
Because I was like, "Hey, why don't you guys like point the bone at all the fucking frackers and the miners? Like,
Mm.
just an idea." And so there was this idea that the magic didn't work because they were from outside the web of relationality or something like that.
Yeah. I'm curious about that and the intersection or the convergence of belief systems and how
Yeah,
deeply the cultural cosmology affects someone's how deeply they buy into the belief systems of that cosmology. But then also, what about the expanding out from that, from an animistic point of view, and seeing life in terms of being full of spirits and egregores and all these energetic components that certainly have free will and their own kind of autonomy outside of us. Yeah,
yeah.
curiosity.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. It's. I think like, we're kind of in this syncretic phase where all this stuff is going to be more and deeply explored. But I mean, there's definitely real energies out there. Like, I mean, some places you just don't feel good in,
Mm.
and you know that you're not meant to be there, and so you kind of develop this sense, and in the Kalu Kalu, the Devil's Marbles in Tennant Creek, like
Mm.
men aren't meant to be there for long, and
Really?
I didn't know
Okay.
that, but like
Mm.
yeah, I was there for a day with my friend camping out there, and we're like, this place is magical. Let's stay here for the
Mm.
whole week. I mean, it's so
Mm.
great. And then
Mm-hmm.
on the second day, we were both wandering in a different ways. Like I went off in one direction, he went off in another direction, and I just got this panic attack, and
Mm.
I ran around trying to find my friend, and he'd had a panic attack as well, and we both were like, we need to get out of here. It's time to leave. So,
Right.
so there's these very strong energies
And did you
in
find
that
out
whole
that that
area.
was indigenous or tribal law, or was that more your own felt
Later on
experience?
from the cultural center, yeah, I talked to the
Right.
lady there.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was very yeah, and it becomes like for me, it becomes this sort of felt kinesthetic sense as well.
Mm.
And so yeah, I definitely there's a lot of, and I ended up spending a bit of time with the. Actually, no, that's not so much Central Australia, but man, you're gonna have a great time there. That place is so magical. I mean, they're still practicing law out there, still singing the song lines.
Mm.
And there's still a wildness about the NT, which I fell in love with. Like it cannot be regulated. The nature's too
Mm.
extreme. The Matrix, I don't think could ever try and tame it. I hope not, because it's 40 degrees heat for like fucking half the year, man. It doesn't, things
Mm.
don't
Mm.
work well there. And it's kind of good.
Mm.
And it's just it's a different way. Like my friend was working up there with the indigenous folk, and she was just telling me how the concept of time there is just different. They call it NT time, not today, not tomorrow, not Tuesdays, not Thursdays, no trucks, no trains. Um,
Mm.
and she was telling me how her job is to enter indig folk into the welfare system. And so many times she'd be like, "So how old are you?" And they're like, "I don't know, 70, 80." Like that's a 10-year difference. That's a pretty. So like, so you don't know when you're born, and they're like, wet season, I think, but they can tell you exactly where they're born. They can tell you where the nearest totem site was. So it's this different mind frame, which is counter to the city mind frame, and it really gave me a taste of like. And I did this walk in the desert in Western Australia for a month, where there was just I had no idea what day it was by day 5. I didn't even know what the time was, and I was like, oh. I understand the dream time now. This is what it would have been like. There's no historical calendrical time. Everything would just, you'd be living in this myth, basically, this mythic poetic landscape where, the landscape is related to stories which teach you about how to survive in the land, and you're living in this myth. So it was incredible. Yeah. So that feeling is still there, definitely. You just got to get away from the tourist sites or go at different times. That's what I found.
Yeah, well, I mean, the furthest I've kind of been up in that area is kind of central South Australia, up past Flinders Ranges, up to I can never remember the name of these ranges or how to pronounce them, the Vulkatuna Gammon Ranges. There's a place called Arkarula Sanctuary up at the northeast corner of that, and that's the furthest that I've been up. So I'm certainly looking forward to making it into the Red Centre.
If you can get a 4-wheel drive, man, that helps you get to...
Yeah, I'll be driving up in a 4-wheel drive, and aside from being with others within that vision quest, then I'll have a few days either side to do some exploring, but I don't have too much of a reference point outside of some of the more commonly known areas such as Uluru, Katajuda, is it Kings Canyon?
I'll give you some...
Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you a few tips, man. There's some really amazing places, and I have to say that's one of the best places I've ever worked with the cactus.
Just quietly.
Honestly. Just quietly, yeah. I was just like, yeah. Well, shut, man. It's like, yeah, and maybe this is for after the podcast is over. I'll give you.
yeah, sounds good.
A few tricks you can do.
Yeah, it was awesome. Well, I mean, aside from those very interesting encounters you had up at Devil's Marbles and the Tall People, are there any other particularly paranormal experiences that you've had out in the desert that were non-plant medicine induced?
Oh, geez.
So I know some stuff happens out there in the desert, and you've certainly confirmed that, as have quite a few other people that I've spoken to.
Mostly other people's stories to do with like the little hairy men, that sort of stuff. I've had experiences with like what I believe to be Naga spirits, or like the the rainbow the serpent spirits.
Yeah.
That story actually goes all the way up through Thailand into India and Tibet, but it sort of changes. So India and Tibet and Thailand, they have the Naga spirits. They have the same lore about the rainbow serpent, and they carve the waterways. They live in the caves. And I sort of developed a relationship, especially in this one spot, just with, what I believe to be like a sort of spirit, like it would sort of talk to me. And again, this could be my imagination, but I would give it offerings, and it would tell me where not to let people swim in, and but nothing fully paranormal. Actually, if anything, the most paranormal thing I've experienced has been in like camping out in the forest in Nimbin, where I believe I had some kind of weird encounter with something that was like circling my campsite and sort of I don't know, fucking with my mosquito net a lot. And then seeing a UFO in like, of all places, in fucking Colorado Beach in Sydney. So
there you go. There is interesting stuff happening out there in Sydney.
Yeah, I just saw a UFO I was not expecting. This was even before my plant medicine journey, and I was totally straight. We were just sitting on a beach and then watched this fucking thing for like 3 hours, do crazy aerial maneuvers. But in terms of paranormal phenomena, most of it has to relate to what people have told me, basically. A lot of it to do with sorcery, little hairy men. I'm not sure if I can share those stories on a podcast because I don't want to incur any wrath. But there's some pretty interesting stuff up that way, and it makes you wonder if your worldview is that way. Does that mean that that's how it physically manifests? How it can manifest physically if your worldview can encompass that sort of extraordinary that sort of extraordinary level of experience sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I guess from working with a Boga, it's really showed me about the dream-like nature of reality. And it's made me wonder if the world we live in is not very paranormal now because we live in a scientific materialist worldview. And then when you spend more time in, say, like Arnhem Land and stuff, where people still very much live in the mythic, spirit-filled landscape, that's why they report this sort of stuff. But I would say that, a lot of my friends were working on remote communities. They said telepathy was very common. Everyone would always know when something had happened to someone the next town over.
Mm.
I met a few nunkeries as well. They were really cool, the native healers.
Mm-hmm.
And they were telling me quite a few stories about, the spirits of the land, basically. I'm not sure how much of the stuff I feel a bit weird sharing it, but
Yeah, sure.
it was all really interesting stuff. I was just like fascinated, So it's alive and well, definitely, and a lot of stories. I think I can share this actually. There's orbs, a lot of light orbs. So I heard this one story about a guy who was I'll just check if I can share this. Yeah, there was this guy who was a cop in an outback town, and actually, sorry, maybe sorry. I'll tell you. Okay, well, fuck. You never know what to share, Just you don't want to. I can tell you off camera, maybe.
We'll leave it at the cops and the glowing orbs. And
magic is real, basically.
Magic is real, and look, there's so many worldviews and realities and things that are happening in Indigenous communities out in remote wilderness locations, particularly the desert, that people that are living in the city and the suburban lifestyles are just not privy to.
And the weird thing is the parallels it has to other world cultures, like talking to some of the Daintree, a rainforest shaman, clever man I met. His stories, I was like, that's Nepalese. That's what happens to the Nepalese shamans. Like, he was telling me how, I can say this because he's already shared it on my podcast, how he was being taught by the little hairy men, like he would sort of be taken at night and be instructed and taught songs and stuff. And in Nepalese shamanic culture, that's what happens. You get abducted by what they call the Ban Junkri, which is like the forest shaman, little hairy man. And he teaches you mantras and he teaches you healing skills, and then you get returned. So I'm like, oh man, that's exactly what. So there's all these parallels between these world shamanic cultures, which really, I'm like, there has to be some archetypal experience being sort of translated depending on what bioregion you're in. It manifests in a slightly different way, but the underlying source code is the same,
Yeah, and I'll retrace to what I said just before, because I know that there are going to be people who are living in the city or the suburbs that have been like, well, we know all this stuff, don't lump us all into the same category. So what I was saying is there will be people who live in the cities or the suburbs that may not be privy to some of these extraordinary or paranormal states of living, states of consciousness, energetic components of reality. That's what I was meaning.
Yeah.
So sorry, city folks, sorry, suburban folk, for lumping you in all the same category.
I think really sensitive people can still perceive that. There's just more noise in the city, You can't hear it as much. If you go out into nature, there's like not as much noise or pollution, psychic pollution. So I feel like I was wondering, like, are the spirits still alive in the city, like, because I was like wandering around in Sydney and there's this like sacred site right pretty much in the middle of the harbour. So I was like, man, maybe I should try and go to this place and see if there's anything still around, or if the channel, if I can switch a channel, is it still happening there, or have they left? I kind of feel like they've left, to be honest. That's my sense. But
my experience is that they're certainly there. They're alive. I don't know whether you could say that they're alive and well, but they're certainly alive from my experience. But as you spoke to, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of distraction that they are particularly hard to tune in with and have conversations with.
Yeah.
But I was going to wrap it up there. But when you were talking about the little hairy men, a while back, I read a book and it was titled Yowie, In Search of Australia's Bigfoot. And I often get a
Yeah.
couple of laughs when I tell people I've read that book, but it's actually a really interesting book that's this convergence of a lot of indigenous history about the hairy men, the Yowies, that have been
Yep.
all along the east coast of Australia. And then I can't remember if it touched on down in Tassie and then kind of more central Australia. It may have. But this convergence of when European settlers came in the early 1800s and all of the phenomena that they started experiencing and noticing, and how it really comes together, speaking about the similar thing. And in it, they speak about the big Yowies, the 8 to 9 to
hairy
10
men.
foot tall, the big hairy men, but they also speak about the little
Yeah.
hairy men. And the indigenous folk, they classify them as two separate species. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
sparked that thought when you said that.
I've got two short stories, but they're both good. The first one is a meeting at Nimbin Town Hall when I was living there, and they had a Nimbin Town Hall meeting about various community things. And then they were like, the elders were there, and then they're like, anyone got any other questions? And someone up the back went, yeah, what's going on with the hairy men? It's classic Nimbin. And they're like, what do you want to know? And I was like, why are there the big ones and the small ones? Like, what's their deal? And the elder was like, oh yeah, the big ones keep the little ones in line. And then I forgot, I have had a paranormal experience in Wongawallan in southeast Queensland. This was actually in the Qigong retreat space that it's like in the hills. And I was with my friend who was sort of keeping the property. There was no one else there. And he was like, hey, this is a Yowie hotspot? I was like, yeah, whatever, man. And he goes, no, seriously, check it out. And so he took me online. We were reading all these Yowie stories from the area. And I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty funny. And later that night, he... okay, this might ruin my credibility, but I drank a bit of ayahuasca. But it was straight vine brew, so there's no DMT in it. So you don't really hallucinate. It was just for a clean out. And he hadn't drunk anything. All right, but I need to be transparent there. Wake up 4 a.m. in the morning. I hear him screaming, just going, who are you? What are you? And he runs to my room just going, do you want to see a hairy man? I kind of just wake up and goes, what's going on, Jimmy? And then we run outside. He turns on the floodlights, and like we're in the middle of the bush, like there's no other houses around for like several hundred meters. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and we just hear these 2 feet, like upright, just crunching sticks, walking slowly away to the bush, and all our hairs on the back are just standing up, and we're just so freaked out. I asked him, like, how did you wake up? He said he woke up from a dream where he was being attacked, psychically attacked. And apparently this is a hallmark of a Yowie experience. They have an experience of like intercepting people's dreams, and that's people wake up basically and they have a Yowie experience. And later on, we were talking to other people who were actually building that cottage that we're in, and they shared with us their Yowie experience. Basically, they believe that they are actually building on a nest or some kind of area. I mean, there's rumors that these guys are interdimensional; they can travel in between worlds. But yeah, this lady was saying that she woke up in the middle of the night and basically there was a Yowie staring back at her through the window, and she was like, "What the fuck?" And then she closed her eyes, opened up, and it was still there, staring back at her. And then she closed her eyes again, opened them up, and he was gone. So,
wow.
So yeah,
there's something to be said there. That's a whole different podcast. It's been a time, mate. We've done language, the great forgetting, Yowies, plant medicine.
Oh man, I had
desert dreaming. Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up. Is there anything you haven't touched upon, or anything you want to share with all the people listening, tuning in? What are you doing at the moment? How can people connect? All that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, well, you can order my book on Amazon. Just look up No Mo Trippin, Nick's son. I'm kind of in the process of trying to get I'm not sure if it's a show together or what. I'm just sort of feeling it out. I'm kind of in an interim phase as I'm trying to work out what things are happening. You can. I've got a blog which I sort of stopped writing several years ago. So
is that Medium?
Moved on. Yeah, Medium.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a website. Geez, man, I need to take care of this marketing stuff.
Okay, so you got website, you've got your blog on Medium, you got your book.
I think the book is
on Amazon.
Yeah,
you got social media channels too, though.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook if you want to befriend me.
But you don't do Instagram, do you? You just Facebook and YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many things to get on. Yeah, I've got a YouTube channel. I'll be updating that more regularly. I've got
Mhm.
a $100 a week bet with my cousin that if I don't put a video up a week, I have to pay him $100. So
Incentive,
that's
good
going to
one.
be, I'm
Yeah.
going to focus on that, see what that's like for about a year. And then potentially going to start doing a podcast. I'm still trying to work out what the best medium for all the shit inside of me is, basically.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Words of wisdom before we peace out.
Just.
Or non-wisdom, that's okay too.
Sorry?
I said or non-wisdom, that's okay too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know. Work it out yourself, I guess. Don't die.
Or at
Try not to
least,
kill yourself.
well, there you go.
Yeah. It's a joke. Actually no. You know what? I'll leave it with a message that I got from the Acacia Spirit, and that is this whole dimension. It's just a joke that you have to take seriously, otherwise it's not funny. So I'll leave you with that.
There you go. Chew on that one for a minute. All right. I'll have all those links in the show notes for wherever listeners, viewers are tuning into this from. And let's wrap it up. Offering a big thanks, Nick Sun, carving out some space time,
Thank you,
having this
Kaida, man.
convo. Thanks, man.
It was a pleasure, man. Had a blast.
Everyone, go tune in
Cheers.
with Nick. Show him some love. If you want to connect with me, I'm pretty sure you know how to do it by this stage, unless you're coming to this fresh. There's the website, coyotekiora.com. You can subscribe on YouTube. I'm on Instagram and also cross-posting to TikTok, whatever you prefer, at Coyote Kiora. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode. Hopefully there's been some gems in here that have been as fruitful as birdsong on Morning Wind. Until next time.